October 27, 1962. A single decision deep beneath the sea could have ended civilization as we know it. Most people don't know his name. But they should. His name was Vasili Arkhipov, and he may have saved the world. But today we ask the terrifying question, what if he hadn't? The early 1960s were an age of fear. Two nuclear superpowers faced each other across oceans and ideology. One misstep, one misunderstanding, could mean the annihilation of the planet. In October 1962, the world came the closest it has ever come to nuclear war. American spy planes discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. The United States imposed a naval blockade. The Soviet Union refused to back down. As the superpowers stared each other down, their militaries moved into position. Among them, 4 Soviet submarines, each armed with a single nuclear torpedo. One of them was the B-59. And aboard it, a moment was building that could change everything. Cut off from communication. Hunted by the U.S. Navy. Surrounded by exploding practice depth charges. The crew believed the war had already started. They had the power to strike back, with a nuclear weapon. All it would take was one more vote. History remembers the ones who launched. But sometimes, it's the ones who refused that change everything. This is not just a story about a submarine. It's a story about how close we came. And what the world might have looked like, if one man had said yes. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine, cut off from communication, was being hunted by American forces. Inside, the crew believed nuclear war had already begun. They were armed with a nuclear torpedo. Conditions aboard the submarine were dire. Temperatures soared above 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Oxygen was low. Tensions were higher. The men were physically and mentally exhausted, fearing every sound was their last. Protocol required all 3 senior officers on board to agree before launching. 2 voted yes. 1 said no. That man was Vasili Arkhipov. His refusal prevented a nuclear attack, and possibly World War III. His argument was simple but profound. No one attacks without orders. His presence of mind saved the submarine, and perhaps the world. The submarine surfaced. The crisis passed. The world moved on. But it was never quite the same. But what if he hadn't? What if Arkhipov, under pressure, had said yes? The U.S. Navy believes it has been attacked with a nuclear weapon. Retaliation is immediate. Airstrikes on Cuba. Nuclear bombs dropped on Soviet missile sites. President Kennedy is briefed. Options are laid on the table. He authorizes full-scale response. The logic of mutual assured destruction takes over. In Moscow, panic sets in. Soviet leaders assume the worst. They launch counterstrikes targeting Europe and the continental U.S. What begins as a localized confrontation becomes a global nightmare, a chain reaction that no one can stop. The Soviet Union responds. NATO bases in Europe are destroyed. Washington and Moscow vanish in mushroom clouds. Strategic bombers scramble. The nuclear genie is out of the bottle. India and China, drawn in by alliances and misread signals, unleash their own arsenals. Israel launches preemptively. Pakistan follows. In mere hours, hundreds of nuclear devices detonate around the globe. Communication systems collapse. Satellites go dark. The global order, carefully built since the end of World War II, disintegrates in a matter of days. The atmosphere fills with ash. Temperatures drop. Crops fail. A nuclear winter begins. And the world enters a new dark age. A nuclear winter blankets the earth. Crops fail. Supply chains collapse. Disease spreads. Famine and lawlessness take over. Technology regresses. Power grids fail. Governments fall. The internet is never invented. The moon landing never happens. Entire generations are lost. Civilization doesn't end in fire, but in silence. Silence that echoes across a broken planet. For centuries to come, if humanity survives at all, this event is remembered not as the Third World War, but as the last. But none of that happened. Because one man said no. Vasili Arkhipov died in 1998. Few outside military history know his name. But perhaps we all owe him our lives. He wasn't a president. He didn't lead an army. He didn't win a war. But in one moment of calm in the middle of chaos, he made a decision that changed everything. In a world driven by escalation, it was restraint that saved us. The only thing more terrifying than the end of the world is how close we came.